Thank you, Mary Beth. I really do appreciate how you always ground us and center us on why we're here. And why we're here is that we have all made a commitment to really lean in on what it means to sustain social justice and racial equity. And we don't do that work by ourselves. We have to do that together as a collective. More importantly, we have to be thinking together about what this work will take, because there are no templates for us to follow. This is emerging co-created work, and that calls us then to be thinking together and learning and growing on the edge together in order to be able to think about what can we do to make this society and our communities and our neighborhoods socially just. And so I really appreciate not only the fact that we started this series, but that we're continuing this series to dig deeper and to expand our scope and practice of how we understand the world. I'm super excited because we have our three panelists from the summer series when we did this Learn segment, and they were able to come back again and be with us today. So we get a full hour with them. So I'm super excited about that. And again, what this piece about Learn is how do we develop our toolkits, right? And how are we going, what do we need to be informed by, and what can we be informed by, and what's out there? And so we have Ruby Bafu, Karen Reece, and Langston Evans with us today to really share with us on a deeper level about what we should be thinking about. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ruby to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Annette. Hello, everyone. I'm Ruby Bafu, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm very excited to be speaking with you all about how to keep the momentum of learning and growing on our journey towards racial justice. And since today's panel is all about learning, I want to start by offering up some definitions of terms that I think are important to understand if we aim to live life in a way that promotes racial justice. And after going over those terms, I'll offer up examples of how we might act once we understand those terms, such as racial equity, white supremacy, microaggressions, and privilege. And finally, I'll end by discussing two initiatives that have great resources for learning more about things such as racism, policing, and abolition. I think it's important to start with some definitions of terms because I want to make sure that we all have a common understanding of the racial landscape in the US. And I also think that these definitions are helpful for thinking through how to apply them in our lives, because as you'll see with some of the examples that I offer, when there is an absence of knowledge and learning, it's easy to cause harm, especially to people from marginalized communities. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. There we go. That's not what I want. There we go. So I'll start with a definition of racial equity. So racial equity is the condition that would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicted one's life chances. So if there was racial equity, your racial identity wouldn't determine whether or not you're able to go to school, get a job, that kind of thing. Racial justice is the systematic, fair treatment of people of all races, resulting in equitable opportunities and outcomes for all. Racial justice and racial equity go beyond anti-racism. So with racial justice, it's not just about the absence of discrimination and inequities, but also the presence of deliberate systems and supports to achieve and sustain racial equity through proactive and preventative measures. So with racial justice and with racial equity, again, it's not just about anti-racism, it's about having systems in place to assure that we're achieving things through proactive and preventative measures. Next, I want to talk about white supremacy. So white supremacy is a historically based, institutionally perpetuated system of exploitation and oppression of continents, nations, and peoples of color by white peoples and nations of the European continent for the purpose of maintaining and defending a system of wealth, power, and privilege. So that's a really thick definition, but that's just a little bit about white supremacy. And finally, I want to end by talking about microaggressions, and I'm going to focus a little bit more on that in a second. But a microaggression is an indirect, subtle, or unintentional statement or action that discriminates against a marginalized group. So when I think of microaggressions, I kind of think of mosquitoes or mosquito bites. So it's over the summer. If you have one mosquito bite, it's kind of annoying, but it's not the biggest deal. But once you have several mosquito bites, they start to itch and it gets really annoying, and it can even cause you pain, right? You can even get diseases from having mosquito bites. It's the same thing with microaggressions. They're really indirect, they're subtle, sometimes unintentional statements and actions. And so when you experience one microaggression, it might not feel like that big a deal or seem like that big a deal. But as they happen over and over again, that can actually have long-term effects on the person who's experiencing that microaggression. And I want to spend a little bit more time talking about that, especially as it relates to learning and educating ourselves. So I'm going to offer up these pictures. So over on the left, you have someone touching Rihanna's hair. She has locks. And on the right, you see someone petting a dog. And so there is an issue happening with the picture on the left, and I'll give you a hint. There is a microaggression occurring. And you can see that Rihanna seems a little bit uncomfortable with it, right? So the issue is here, we can see that it's okay to pet dogs, it's okay to pet animals, that's fine. But with the picture that was on the left, you can see that someone's touching Rihanna's hair as if she were a dog or as if she were an animal. And in that case, that is a microaggression because of the long history that has to go along with Black women's hair in particular, and what it means to just touch people as if you're allowed to, right? As if you have access to their body. In this case, that would be an example of a microaggression. And let's say you make a mistake and you enact a microaggression against someone else, right? When that happens, you want to listen, ask, and learn. And I'm going to talk more about what that might mean. So let's say you make a mistake. You want to listen. So let's say you make a mistake towards a person, you hurt them. You want to listen to their experiences without interrupting. So if they tell you that you've harmed them and how, if they tell you how they've harmed you, you've harmed them and how, you want to listen to hear what it is that they have to say. You can also ask thoughtful questions about things that you don't understand, but you want to be very careful because if asking about that topic could be problematic, you want to refrain from asking and do your own research and ask for resources. And I'll talk more about resources at the end, but you also want to learn from your mistakes and experiences and change your behavior. That is a very big part. And part of changing your behavior, again, it's all part of learning, asking for resources, doing your own research. And again, we'll talk about that. But I think it's also important to think about privilege and have a definition for privilege, because that often shapes how we approach learning, right? Or what it is that we think is useful to learn, or it also shapes what we don't know. So privilege operates on the personal, interpersonal, cultural, and institutional levels, and gives advantages, favors, and benefits to members of dominant groups at the expense of members of target groups. And in the US, privilege is granted to people who have membership in one or more of these social identity groups. So let's say white people, able-bodied people, heterosexual people, cisgender men, Christians, middle-class people, English-speaking people. These are all people that have privilege. And again, the privilege that we have operates on different levels, but it also can shape what it is that we know and how we approach our learning. So when it comes to causing harm to people because there might be an absence of knowledge or there are certain things that you don't know yet, it's important to remember that even if you don't mean to offend someone, that doesn't mean you shouldn't take responsibility for the offensive thing you said or did. And part of learning comes with the understanding that it's impact over intent. So you want to think about the impact that you have on people versus your intention when moving through the world. So a lot of the resources that I just offered came from the MAIN initiative, which is a funding organization that pools together resources that relate to racial justice. And I'll actually show a little bit about their website in a second. And I also share another resource that I think is really important. That one is MPD 150. And MPD 150 is a community-based initiative by local organizers, researchers, artists, and activists who aim to shift the discussion about policing in Minneapolis specifically from one of procedural reforms to one of more structural reforms. So both initiatives have a lot of really great resources, a lot of great books that y'all could look at that could be really helpful for learning more. And I think that when it comes to learning, first and foremost, I think it's important to read and understand your history. And the reason why I'm going to talk more about MPD 100's work is because they have an extensive list of readings that are useful, especially in this historical moment that we're living through. But I know that not everyone can read, or not everyone's trying to read really thick text, because that can be pretty difficult. And what's great about what MPD 150 has to offer is that they have comic books for you to look at. They have oral histories and mixtapes for you to listen to. And they also have performances that you can learn from as well. So when it comes to learning, again, I think it's important to read and understand your history and to tap into the resources that are available to you. Because even if you can't read a 300-page book, there are other ways to gain knowledge as well. I think another way to learn is by attending virtual talks. Nowadays, essentially everything is virtual, and that can make it a lot more accessible for people. So I would definitely tap into virtual talks by Freedom Inc. or Urban Triage, which are two community organizations based in Madison, because they can offer you free political education. Oftentimes they host panels, you might have the opportunity to ask questions, and attending virtual talks are a really, really great way to learn, and it's accessible and usually free. I think also when you're learning, let's say you're curious or confused about something, it's better to ask questions than assume, right? So part of learning is, again, about asking questions. But you do want to be aware of the fact that people don't exist to educate you, and that you're not entitled to an answer to all of your questions, right? Because that can place emotional labor on the person you're asking, which can make them unhappy or uncomfortable. So I would say that it's okay to ask questions when it's appropriate. Otherwise, try to do research on your own time and seek resources that can help you, instead of trying to place emotional labor on other people if they don't have the time, for example. I think that also when you're trying to educate yourself or learn more about racial justice, it's super important to seek out content in your free time that centers marginalized people's lived experiences. So you got to think about, what are you watching on Netflix? What are you watching on Hulu? What kind of podcasts are you listening to? Because even in your free time, those could, again, be ways to learn more and also learn more about people's experiences. And in that case, you're really not burdening anyone, because you're just watching television, right? You're not actually asking a friend or a colleague about their experience. You can learn more just on your own time. Another tip is that you definitely want to be supple and open to learning and making mistakes, because part of learning is making mistakes. And one of those mistakes, again, might be a microaggression, right? But that's when you just want to be open and understand that it's going to happen, but you need to understand how you're going to address it. And lastly, when it comes to learning, I just think that it's important to be mindful of your privilege, because again, that's going to shape what it is that you do and do not know, and what you might think is important. But with that, you also want to learn about techniques of communication, because again, learning is all about making mistakes, sometimes asking people questions, but when you know how to communicate with others, your learning journey can go a lot more smoothly. I guess I'll end with this, and then I'll show you guys the two resources. But again, if you make a mistake, you want to acknowledge it, apologize without making excuses, and in the future, actively avoid making the same mistake, especially by educating yourself. So I'm going to stop sharing that slide. And then I'm going to move over to show you just these two resources super quick. Let's see if I can get there. Okay, so this is the MPD 150 website, and I believe that the link is also in that crowdsourced document of resources that we have. But as you can see, they have an extensive list of books. There's some articles here that you could look at. There are themes touching on abolition, policing, and there's also a lot of great things about history and context. So especially with the present moment that we're living in, just giving context to this moment. And all these resources, there's a variety. So again, not just books and articles, there are also performances, videos, slideshows, things that can be a little bit more accessible, such as zines and these printable resources. And then again, this is the main initiatives website that's also in that crowdsourced document. And this is where I got a lot of my definitions from, but this is also another resource for you all. So thank you for listening.
That is great. Thank you, Ruby. Really appreciate you. As we are making it clear we've got to dig deeper, we've got to lean into the learning, and the crowdsourcing document and the perspectives that each of you as our panelists today are bringing, and others along the whole series. What the whole purpose of this and intention of this is to have us dig deeper, move deeper, move forward, while understanding our humanness and our humanity, in terms of knowing that we will make mistakes. Of course we will. We are perfectly imperfect. And so I really love how you put that out there, that, yeah, own your mistake, lean into it, and keep moving forward so that you can continue your journey of learning. So thank you so much for educating while affirming, that we are human. Just so the listeners and watchers of our series are aware, what we've been doing is we've been offering our panelists a series of questions to think through as they prepare for each of our segments. And I have not been disappointed yet. Each segment has been amazing, and I don't think that we're going to be disappointed today. You just got a flavor of what our panelists bring to the table. So thank you again. But here are the questions that we put before them. We asked them around in thinking about how we sustain the journey around racial justice, and knowing that it takes lifelong learning. What do we need to know? So we asked them to share ideas about how we could, continue to learn, prepare, plan, and develop, our learning around racial equity and social justice. We also asked them to share with us, like, what's most critical, right, in learning for this movement, not a moment, a movement. We've been really clear that this is a movement, and all of us as individuals, as a collective, we offer the momentum, and that's what gets this movement. So what do we need to know? What's critical in learning to help sustain this movement? And then what would you caution us, right? Like, what do you caution us around in terms of what do we need to know when we're learning and we're developing and growing? And then what are you learning? Like, I wanted to hear from the panelists, like, what are you all learning, and how are you stretching and growing yourselves in terms of, and what are you following as you develop your own knowledge? Because this isn't something that is only for us or them, it's for all, it's the collective we all are in this journey of learning. And Ruby has already demonstrated that she tried to find balance in those questions, and I know Karen and Langston are going to do the same thing. But I just wanted to make sure that our listeners and those who are watching knew, like, what questions did we put in front of the panelists, so that they could really offer their perspective and experience on this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen Reece for her to share with us what she thinks about what we need to do in terms of learning. So Karen.
And thanks, Ruby. That was awesome, especially the pictures that you showed. My name is Karen Reece. I'm the Vice President of Research and Education at Nehemiah Community Development Corporation, also known as Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development. We are an organization that's been around for about 30 years on Madison's South Side. And we have an initiative called Justified Anger that is really focused on mobilizing people to work towards racial justice. And we primarily design resources for white allies and non-Black allies, or people who are looking to walk alongside the Black community in this journey and in this fight. But of course, our resources are beneficial and open to everyone. We also have a 9-week Black History class that we run every year. It will be all virtual this year. So you can keep an eye on our website to learn. Registration will probably open mid to late November. And that's focused on Black history in the context of US history. And you'll be learning things that most of us never learned about our history. As Ruby mentioned, a lot of these stories are told in the frame of white supremacy, and they just leave a lot of details out. So it's really important that we have that knowledge. One way I like to think about learning is from a holistic standpoint. So where does learning fit into everything else that we do? Some of you may be familiar with the wellness wheel. So this is a model that's emerged in the last couple of years to help us think about how do we balance all the different pieces in our lives so that we have, a little bit of everything. And one key part of that wellness wheel is our intellectual wellness. So a lot of times we just think of learning as something additional that we're adding on, but we don't really think of it as being an important piece of our character development, and an important piece of us being a well-balanced and productive community member. Intellectual wellness is recognizing the creative abilities and finding ways to expand your knowledge and skills. And this involves a number of different things. One is brain exercise. So those of you who love Candy Crush, have no fear. That can be a brain exercise helping your intellectual wellness. At least that's the story I'm telling myself. You also want to look at your personal interests. How are you rounding out the things that you spend your time doing? Conversation is a big piece in this too, getting those different perspectives. And then we also want to look at our education overall. How are we putting all of these things together to make sure that we are intellectually well? On Nehemiah's website, and I will drop the link in the chat shortly, we have a number of different resources that you can look at to expand your learning and to expand your effectiveness and ability as a person who is walking in this journey towards racial justice. And so one thing that's really important in learning is to set our intentions and adjust what we spend our time doing. This is really an essential part of making sure that your learning is complementing your journey. And you want to make sure your learning is multifaceted. So we want to read things, educate ourselves, think critically. We also want to hear, we want to listen to new voices, music, stories. One way to be really sort of two birds with one stone in this situation is listen to podcasts about issues that you're not familiar with. And in this setting, you can practice being an active listener. Ruby was talking about the importance of listening to people's stories whose perspectives are different than ours. So podcast is a great way to practice that active learning. You can also watch things. Visuals have a lot of power and the ability to immerse us into other communities and cultures when we can't be there, to give us a sense of what things are about in ways that reading and listening can't do. So in that racial equity mobilizer, you're going to see a number of examples. And this is by all means not an exhaustive resource, but just a few places that, if you're getting started, or even if you're far along on this journey, that you might want to pick up. So to read, there's a classic essay called White Privilege by Peggy Mcintosh that really goes through and defines what white privilege is. You can get into a guide to allyship. So how do you want to structure your life so that you are doing truly sustained engagement? And then you can get into a number of different focus areas. So do you want to learn more about the housing crisis, the racial wealth gap, or education? There are a lot of ways that you can engage in reading and learning. We also list a few things that you can watch, and these resources are linked for the most part. And again, looking at all different aspects, health disparities, criminal justice, and looking back at our history. Listening, there are also several options here. Tim Wise is a really excellent resource for understanding white privilege and race, especially if you are a white person who has grown up in primarily white contexts. He gives a very intellectual perspective on things, but it'll give you some very great tools to combat some of the problematic narratives that we hear in politics and in conversations today. Of course, I'm biased, but one of the great podcasts you can listen to is my boss, Dr. Alex G., and his podcast, Black Like Me, which just won an award, favorite podcast from the Wisconsin Podcast Association. They cover a number of different topics. It's very conversational. It's fun to listen to. So go to wherever you get your podcasts and check that out. There's you'll be able to find something you're interested in. Although for learning, I would also like to push you to think about what aren't you interested in? And is that something that you should maybe learn more about? We tend to gravitate towards areas that we're most comfortable with or something that we like to spend our time on. And that tends to be things that are more familiar to us and more common to our own culture and life experience. So challenge yourself to look outside of the things that you enjoy doing and see if there aren't some other things that you're missing. Learning is an action. So a lot of times in the trainings that we do, we hear from people like, okay, this is all great, but what do? I want to do something. I want to fix something. Well, it's really important to spend appropriate amount of time in this education, in this learning mode, so that when you do embark on actions, they're in an informed manner and they're in an appropriate direction. So I've outlined some examples of action here: education, individual action, and collective action. These are all three very critical steps in taking action in fighting towards racial justice. And no one of these things is more important than another. But at the end of the day, it's really all about relationships. We can read all we want. We can watch all the movies out there, listen to all the podcasts, but we're still going to be in our bubble. And this is especially to my white allies out there. If all you do is read and stick to yourself, you're never going to fully understand what's out there. We have to push ourselves to test our knowledge and to get out into the community and interact with people. Now, as Ruby said, you want to take caution because we don't want to harm other people with our blind spots, but at the same time, we don't know what our blind spots are until we get out there. So form relationships. Don't just seek out relationships with people of color, but form relationships with other white people who are on this journey, people who might be farther along on the journey than you, so that you can understand where you are and where you need to be. And so I want to leave you with just a few questions here. First of all, where are the gaps in your knowledge? Second of all, look at the sources that you've used to learn recently. Have you learned from teachers with a variety of different backgrounds? Now, one excellent resource that you should not discount is the YouTube, the value of YouTube. Almost any of the questions that you can think of, Ruby talked about touching hair as a microaggression. If you want to learn more about what other microaggressions you might be committing, look it up on YouTube. If you want to learn more about a certain practice or a certain way of doing things, for people who have a different racial background or an experience than you, look it up on YouTube. It's a great place to get a variety of perspectives on an issue and to bolster your knowledge. And then last, how are you pushing beyond your comfort zone? And really making sure that you're stepping outside of the things that you enjoy doing or make you feel good about what you're doing and making sure you're pushing yourself. And so as for the question about what am I doing to learn, I'm constantly, in everything that I talked about today, I'm constantly working through those pieces to make sure that I continue to learn. You never get there, right? You don't get a degree in racial justice. There's no end point. We're always learning, we're always synthesizing the information, and we're always looking to see where we can take the next step. So look at this as a journey, not as a journey that's going to be lifelong and not to something where you're going to eventually get to the end. When you get to an end point or a milestone, it's really just the beginning into another segment of your journey. So I will leave you with that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Karen. The bottom line is it is a journey of the self, right? And so all we can do is really provide people with really good questions for that self-understanding of what we need. And I love how you said, hey, if you're telling yourself that you're not really interested in this or that you don't think you need this, ask yourself that question again. Why don't you think you need that? What is it that you think you know that you don't need to know anymore, right? We've all been there. I can share my own personal story that, there have been times when I've had to really check myself too on this and think that because I have this experience behind me and knowledge, around me, that somehow that makes me super knowledgeable. But the reality is that information is helpful at times. I too have much to learn, and this world is constantly growing and changing. And there have been some real deep shifts in terms of how we should understand the world. And so we've got to remember, folks, that we have been socialized and normalized to be complicit in this construct of, understanding what white supremacy means, and what it means to understand systemic inequity and how it's embedded in everything that we do. And so, as we've been saying, we're swimming in it. So we want to be careful that we're not finding ourselves being complicit by thinking that we don't have more to learn, when actually we have much to learn, and that we've got to really be open to it. So no matter how young you are or how old you are, we have got lots of room for growth and learning. So thank you for reminding us that, Karen. I appreciate that. So Langston, it's on you to really bring us home to the finish line and really be the glue that ties giving us another point of view about how we need to think about learning. And I'm really excited to hear what you'll share with us based on your experience and what you're seeing in your own space and the spaces around you. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you for having me here. I will apologize in advance and say I don't have slides, so you have me to look at for the next few minutes. But it's a pleasure for me to be here, and I'll introduce myself again. My name is Langston Evans, and I am I work for the Madison Metropolitan School District. In our secondary, I work with AVID and our college career community readiness for all students. And in my spaces, one of the things we think about from education, both in terms of the education of our students, our families, our staff, and our community, and our world. We've been having conversations. I was just in a conversation today with folks in Texas and folks in Washington, DC, about how we're educating our communities. And it really comes back to, I think, what you've heard from both Ruby, Annette, and Karen, talking about, we know we're in this moment where we need to learn. And sometimes that can be overwhelming because we have these tensions about, there's so much to learn. I turn on everything. There's so much to read. There's so much. And so what does it mean for me? And so what I sort of want to talk about is just really tying together what I heard, but also thinking about how you might want to think about a way to move forward with your own educational journey. So we know we need to take this journey. And this is the journey that folks have taken before us. The world has not always been this way. And a lot of folks have had a hand in building and changing and working for social justice for many, many years. But we need to continue that work. And it's not a moment, it's a lifetime. And so what we want to do is not get overwhelmed in the moment, but what we want to do, what I would suggest is that we think about what are digestible goals, what are clear, concrete actions, and what's my next small step that I can do that builds momentum. And we go from small step to bigger step to a slight jog, and then eventually we're going to be running. And so I offer this. In this journey, we want to hold ourselves accountable. So that's one of the things that we want to talk about. And another thing is we also want to practice humility, grace, and forgiveness for ourselves and for those around us. Because the idea that we are going to move ourselves out of our comfort zone, because we don't learn in our comfort zone, as Karen was so eloquent to say, we learn when we push ourselves beyond where we're comfortable. But we also have to know when we get to a place where it's overwhelming. And so determining where that space is going to be a little bit of trial and error. So what I want to talk a bit about is first how we focus and think about what we're going to learn about, and then sort of how we might want to begin to move. And I'm just going to drop some nuggets. This is not going to be overwhelming. I'm going to drop sort of really bite-sized nuggets of some ideas and things that I found work well when I'm talking to folks and what other folks have used. And so first, I encourage us to think about how we want to focus what we're going to learn about, because I can learn about anything and everything, and it can be connected to the very thing that we talked about with with Mr. Floyd, or the multitude of murders that have happened across our year and our decade and our history. How do we connect to that? How do I want to connect to that? And the thing is, you need to find a way that is authentic to you to connect to that. Identify an area of action or interest that you actually will want to make a difference in, not just for today, but for tomorrow and moving forward. Connect it to something you know, something you're passionate about, something that you have access to, right? It could be a position of privilege that you have access to this. I have access to print media or media in general. I have access to, and so building understanding and education around those areas that you have access to, that you have interest in, is critical and important. And then nextly, think about a next step in terms of concrete outcome. And I thought that Karen said that nicely as well. Outcomes and actions can be many things, but you need to figure out before you start learning what you want to do with what you're going to learn. Because just learning for the sake of learning is beautiful and wonderful, and I'm in education and I applaud that, but it doesn't sustain. If we don't have a purpose, if we don't have a concrete action of how I'm going to apply this, then most people will not stick with it. And so thinking about what is my next action? I'm going to learn this to do what? It doesn't have to be the big action. Yes, I want to make the world a better place, but to do that, I need to do something. And so thinking about that, and you don't have to have all the answers, but you need a direction that will help frame your education. And then when you frame your search, so you're looking for what you want to learn about, how you want to move in that space, think about the connections and the power you hold. Think about how you walk in the spaces that you are in. And then what can you learn to apply to the spaces you're already in? One resource that I found is helpful in that is there's TED Talks. I'll mention a few, but I like TED Talks because they're short and they're to the point and they're entertaining. And I can do them while I'm cooking. So one of them is Brian Stevenson's TED Talk, we need to talk about an injustice. And one of the things I love about that one is he talks about his work with the Innocence Project, but he talks about the story of his grandmother telling him what is right and what is wrong. It helps frame that we need to just think about in our heart, where do we start with what is right, what is wrong, what can I do, what do I feel empowered to do right now? And then thinking about where on a continuum of what do you need to learn? Thinking about if we have a continuum from awareness, like I know a little bit about this, to I'm ready to act. And it is a continuum. And we think of, there's many ways to think of it. And I think one of the graphics that Karen put up was nice. And it aligns with what I think too. You start with awareness with your eyes and ears. What do you see? What do you hear? And then understanding. What do you think about it? How do you add context to that? And then where's your commitment behind it? What do I really care about this? And how can I commit to this? And then what is my action that aligns with my heart and my commitment, my head and my understanding, and what I see in the world? And so thinking about that is important. And then when we think about how are we going to move in this, I'm going to also offer a few definitions, but not dive too deeply into them. First, I'll start with a couple of resources. I know other folks have thrown up resources, and they're also wonderful. And so I'll just throw up a couple too. I think in my world, I found that Teaching Tolerance is a great resource for folks. It's very digestible, teachingtolerance.org. And the National Equity Project is also a great resource. They have a website and a variety of very accessible resources, videos, articles, really how-tos in a variety of ways. So one of the questions that we want to ask ourselves is, what is our perspective? How do we shape our lens? And I think Annette talked about this, is that we're in a world in which sometimes the fish don't recognize the water because we've been shaped by the world in which we're in. So we need tools to help ourselves recognize the water around us. And one of the tools is a lens of systemic oppression. It's a metaphor that helps us realize the influence of the everydayness of oppression, of the normalness, of the it's just the way it isness of oppression. It helps us break it down. And so thinking about that lens, there's sort of three levels to the way that oppression works once we put that lens on. And that I think helps us think about how do we want to learn. And so the first level of that lens is the individual level. And I think in any area that you're looking to educate yourself, the individual level has to come first. So the individual level is your own beliefs and how they shape your actions, and both conscious and unconsciously shape what seems like common sense to you, what seems like the right thing to you. Thinking about of any topic, and I'll give you an example. One of the things that might be police brutality, but it could also be cooking. The oppression and systemic oppression of cooking, of both gender, race, LGBTQ, and class. It could be everything from music, right? Start with your passion, but first start with what do you think about it? What is your individual assumptions and biases about it? A resource that is, I would say, somewhat controversial, but still out there is the Harvard Project Implicit project that is Harvard University has a variety of psychological tests and tools to explore your unconscious bias, right? And it's just an opportunity for maybe you to engage yourself in conversations that you may not want to have with a friend yet, and that's okay. And so looking at yourself first. Secondly is learning on interpersonal communication and interactions. Whatever you're going to do, it's going to start with you understanding yourself. But if you're going to have actions that happen in the world, you're going to have actions with others. And whether those others are similar to you in their identity, or whether those others have various differences from your own identity, learning how to engage in those interactions productively is absolutely critical. And so there are a ton of resources, but thinking about what some people call social intelligence or emotional intelligence, but the cultural part of that. How do I navigate differences? And I think Ruby did a wonderful job talking about where microaggressions play into that, but also thinking about that conversation, any of these conversations about topics that A, we don't feel like we're experts on, or B, may not be according to the rules which I grew up with, are going to be conversations which are going to be emotional to us. So we need to think about how do we educate ourselves to handle our emotions. And I think that Karen's wheel of the way that education happens in all these domains in our lives, be it physical, intellectual, social, and emotional, understanding that the emotional part of the education is critical too. And so select something that actually has an action that's not too big for you right now and you can do. Be humble in it. Be aware that there are many stories and many ways to get to progress, and that every voice is going to be different, but be open to learning and be open to growing. Be accountable for your next step. Make a next step. It's okay to fail, but it's not okay to stand still. Okay? And share your journey with others. When you're in that space that you're holding yourself accountable, bring somebody with you. Bring somebody who's not quite there yet. Don't try to argue with the person who's so far across the room that they ain't even hearing you. But bring that person who's like right behind you and be accountable with them. We call them accountability buddies. Who's that person who's you're going to go to the gym with? This is your intellectual gym. You need someone who's going to get you up in the morning, who's going to let you know what's that article that they're reading. And learn from our elders. We have people of all backgrounds who have been through, not this, because no one's been through this, but they've been through stuff, as my grandmother would say. I've been through stuff. Listen to them. And so I'll close with that. One of the things that I've been reading is a book by Tina Bell Wright, and I'll send it to the folks to put it in, called A Blueprint of Black Self-Determination. And it really breaks it down for the folks of color. But another book that I went actually back to that I think is written so beautiful is a book by Henry Louis Gates called Life Upon These Shores. And it's a look at American history through an African-American perspective starting in 1513. So those are the things that I've been reading, but I appreciate this time. Thank you.
You know, wow, you didn't disappoint, Langston, not at all. Thank you so much. All of you, all of our panelists for every session has just been like the right connection and just the right perfect fit with these points of views that are just so helpful, and I think really can help bridge for different people depending on the perspective that they're coming from. There's seriously something for everyone. And thank you, because I'm feeling like really filled up. Earlier, before we got on screen, Mary Beth had said, you know, this work fills you up. You know, what we're doing in these sessions fills you up, and it's definitely filling me up. I definitely am really appreciating what I'm getting and learning and sharing with all of you. So thank you again. I think I'm gonna have a permanent grin. I'm gonna hold on to it for at least 24 hours. So really, you guys gave a lot of thought about what to be thinking about, you know, as we learn. And I really appreciate your approach to it. Has there been any like one thing that really struck you as you've been thinking about, you know, I mean, what's happening is that this isn't just about race. This isn't just about health. This is about like our whole society, like who we are as people. And we're having this transformational moment. And I'm just wondering, because when you have a transformational moment in history, like, you know, there's sort of the early emergings of what's coming. And I'm just curious if there's something early that is starting to rise in each of you that you feel comfortable sharing in terms of how you think about this learning and this work of social justice and racial equity. And would just love to get a bird's eye view from your perspective on that. Karen, you look like you were nodding. I'm wondering if I can like cue you up for that, for the first response on that.
Sure. What came to mind, I'm a researcher, so I care a lot about details and facts. And one thing that really disturbs me in our public discussions these days is there seems to be this blurring of the lines between what opinion is and what fact is. And so the great thing about this learning component is that it really is about getting facts. When we enter into a conversation with someone, especially if we disagree, it's important that we start from like, we agree on, okay, these things are true, but then how do I feel about them? And it's so important that we agree on a common set of facts. The world is round. It just is. And I can support that in a number of ways, or you can get on a plane and go a long distance and you'll see it with your own eyeball. That's a fact. Now, how I might feel about traveling around the world is different. We can discuss that. But I guess in our conversations, make sure that you're armed with facts. And if you don't know, just say you don't know. And then write that down to look up later. There is no shame in that. And more people these days need to be saying, I just don't know. And figuring it out.
100%. I hear that. Langston, Ruby, how would you want to jump in on that?
I can jump in and then pass it. I think for me, this moment has brought up the need for combining compassion with passion, holding people's humanity with our passion. We can disagree, but we don't have to be disagreeable. We don't have to back down, but we don't have to beat up. The civil rights activist Diane Nash, who was with Martin Luther King and the lunch counter sit-ins in Nashville and a variety of other things, would say things like, we need to be hard on systems and soft on people.
Right.
So I think that moment is now, and knowing that we can be violent in our opposition to hatred, but not hate those who we oppose.
That's really deep. Thank you for that. I wrote that down. In fact, can you put that in the chat? Because those three things were like, they came the back down versus beat up. And there was a statement you said before that. And you're right. We can hate the inequity, but let's not carry hate. I love it. I didn't say it how you did, but that's where we need to be. Ruby.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo what Karen and Langston said. And I guess what I'm thinking is that there's a lot of momentum in the present moment, I think, as it relates to learning. I mean, a lot of the resources that we shared existed before 2020 and that kind of thing. But I definitely think there's a lot of motivation and push to be engaging in learning. So I think that people are able to see why it's so important because of how things are unfolding right now. So I definitely think that now is the moment, if there ever was one, to really engage in this learning, because it definitely will make an impact. And I think a lot more people are seeing that, which is super positive.
I want to dig a little bit deeper with you, Ruby. Being someone looking at the spectrum of who's all here and making some assumptions about like where we fall generationally. I'm curious from your perspective, when you think about learning, like, what does learning mean? Because I know that people will already put on somebody who's younger, this learning curve, right? But I feel like with this moment of what we're talking about, it's different, right? Like that's not necessarily all that needs to be understood about someone who's younger coming into this movement. And I'm curious, like, how you would sort of frame up what learning means from the context of someone who obviously is learning anyway, right? Like, and I hope I'm asking this question kind of right. But I'm just curious from your perspective, how you're seeing this. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So like as a young person, how I'm approaching learning?
Or do you think about it a little bit differently because of what it is we're trying to, we all have to learn, right? Like this learning isn't just limited to young people, right? Like everybody has to learn. And I'm just wondering if you see it, what kind of insight you have, because it feels like a double learning.
I think it's hard because I think that I have spent a lot of time learning about things that I didn't necessarily live through. And even for folks who might be older than me, they might not have also lived through those historical moments, but they were the generation right after. But I'm the generation that came up, with 9/11, with like with a lot of very particular historical moments. And so I think that really encourages me, but also forces me to just make sure that I'm aware of things that have happened before me, because that offers context for the things that I'm learning right now. I hope I'm answering your question. I think it's something I'm still thinking about too, so it's a little hard, but.
Because I think you have two roles. You're sort of creating the space, right? Like there is a burden on young people to be like, okay, like, so, help us get out of this, right? And you're like, okay, but I'm also learning too. And I didn't quite get that question.
No, but yeah, no, there's definitely also that pressure because, so as I'm learning about things in the past and also I'm in the present moment, I'm also thinking about building in the future and what that's going to look like. But that's also hard because in a lot of ways, I'm almost pessimistic because how can I be hopeful about building a better future if what I'm learning right now is showing me, that might not be possible. So I feel like it can be difficult because a lot of times I'm like cynical, but also hopeful because I'm learning so much. And like that does offer hope, but that can also just be shaped by our present reality, which isn't always the most optimistic. So there's definitely a lot of pressure, especially when it comes to building.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear that and feel that. And I added more by not getting the question quite right. But you handle it like a rock star. So thank you for hearing the question. Bridging that learning, right? And what are we using to fuel our knowledge? One question that came up was, so is there one what is centering you in terms of like a favorite resource, like whether it's a book, a podcast, a movie, that you're leaning on right now when you think about racial justice? Is there something that really speaks to you right now that you're digging into?
There's a new podcast out called Louder Than a Riot. It's an NPR podcast, and it looks carefully at the rise of hip hop culture and music happening simultaneously with the rise of mass incarceration, and what we can learn about the dynamics in the music industry, but also about what rappers are saying in some of this music and how it connects to social issues and systemic racism.
I do like how they're weaving and braiding cultural, the ways in which we culturally engage with life, and music and art are definitely a part of the foundation when we look at diverse cultures. So I really appreciate how they're really taking that seriously and really putting in racial equity and social justice. It's always been in there, but now really highlighting it and showcasing it. So that's a great recommendation. Langston or Ruby, anything that you all are into right now?
Yeah, I've been super into Lovecraft Country, for those who are into like drama and horror. It's not like the most, I mean, it's definitely educational, but it's not like a documentary kind of thing. But it's a really good drama show, and it has a lot of history, which has been helping me just contextualize things that I've known and that I've learned about history, but just in a different form, and in an entertaining way as well. So I would definitely recommend that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and as I previously mentioned, I've been sort of diving into the history because I come from a more of a science background, but learn some of the things I mentioned about Henry Louis Gates Jr., and I've been looking into the rise and fall of the African Asian civilizations back in the in sort of the early history period, looking at some of the resonances and similarities to how we frame that, but also how we investigated it from the beginning.
Okay, I like that. Something I've been thinking about when I asked the question, I was like, how would I answer it? I feel like PBS has actually done a really good job of packaging content, both through TV and also online. So that is another source. And and I will also, boom, 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 bridge us to our crowdsourced document that literally is in real time being updated. As we're even talking today, resources are being moved over to that crowdsourced document. And I want to remind folks that it was designed for this very purpose. So many people locally and globally have really weighed in on books, podcasts, movies, articles, YouTube, you name it, into this crowdsourced document. And I really encourage people to take a look at it. I want to bring it up real quick, just as a friendly reminder of what it looks like. And it's interesting, when I've gone in there, I've seen other people in there as well, periodically going in and updating the document. And the way that the resources are set up is that we have put it under different categories for people to be able to access so that they can look through it. There are many pages. Look, there's even a graphic in there of somebody's books. They're like, here, this is what my bookshelf looks like. But there's all these different links that you can take a look at that just go on, that are local as well as global in terms of thinking about these issues, that I think, again, there's something for everyone in terms of thinking about their learning journey. So I just really encourage folks to not only access it, but also add to it, because the crowdsourcing is about crowd sharing. And as Langston said, this is about bringing people along. So make sure that you bring people along by sharing your knowledge and ideas about what you think can help build us up in terms of helping us understand and contextualize what it means to live in a multicultural society where there can be more than one truth, right? And there's more than one lived experience, which means that there needs to be more than one solution to the many concerns and joys that we want to co-create together. And crowdsourcing information is a great way to do that. So, take a look at this document and see for yourself how rich it is in terms of what it offers. The other thing that I would remind everyone is that you don't do this work without being intentional. And if you, as I've always said to myself, what gets measured gets done. And so in the frame of that, it's really thinking about what's your work plan for how you want to get the work done. And so I'll show you another document that we all as a team co-created together to help us think about how are we going to act? How are we going to be accountable to ourselves? And what's great about this document is you can use it as an individual, but you can also use this as an entity. So if there is a work team or an organization that wants to make itself accountable for how it's going to do their work, it's easy, it's simple, and it's pretty straightforward in terms of just helping you map out what can your first actions be and what can your next actions be to keep that momentum, and then how can you sustain that action. So ultimately, if you can embed the change, then you've got movement going, then you've got momentum. We set this up so that it's framed out based on the series itself. So today was the Learn series. We've had the spheres of influence. How do you support yourself and others in this work? How do you sustain the work? How do we take care of ourselves? And so we created these bands so that people can really be specific about how they can think about what are the actions that I need to take to help me grow my own knowledge, but also help me keep momentum, and how can I actually embed the change. And so we just wanted to pop it up so that you all can have it and see it for yourself. Those links are available and out there. I want to thank our panelists again. Ruby, Langston, Karen, thank you so much for your knowledge, your skills, and your ability, and just for being in this community and always every day doing your part to make us all better with your presence. Really appreciate it. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to just share a quick poem, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mary Beth to write us out, which is two things I want to leave with us all, which is one, and this quote is from Mary McLeod Bethune, which says, "Believe in yourself, learn, and never stop wanting to build a better world." That's what this is all about, is wanting to build a better world. So let's do our part. And the other one is, if you get tired, learn to rest, not to quit. Because this work is going to tire us out, because it's hard work. It's emotional, it's intellectual, and it takes all of our physical energy. So it's okay to get tired, but also learn how to rest, because we do not want you to quit. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Beth.
Yes, thank you all so much. Thanks to Annette from Equity by Design and the Mortgage Center for being one of our core collaborators in this series. Again, all of the information about this particular panel and the other events that we're hosting as a part of this series are available on our Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies Facebook page. So you can find out more there, and you can actually go back and watch any sessions that you missed, since the Facebook live streams remain available on that main feed on our page. We're going to be back here doing another session later this week on Thursday at 4 p.m. And the theme of that one is going to be on sustaining our efforts. And we're going to have a really special session in November after the election. We decided to wait till after the election on how to support the organizations out there doing the work on the front lines. And we don't have to figure out every action for ourselves because there are plenty of people out there organizing efforts that we can support. So that's the idea behind that one. So most importantly, just another special thanks to our amazing panelists. It's just constantly an inspiration, the way that we can tap the shoulders of folks in our network and then have the kind of world-class presentations that we heard today. And I'm so glad that we can save these and have them to return to going forward. So thank you again. I echo Annette's gratitude to Langston, Ruby, and Karen. And we hope that these conversations will continue and that everybody out there is indeed working on a work plan and finding their accountability partners. And I think we'll also look for ways, even after these formal sessions are over, to get people back together to talk about how their experience is going. So thank you all so much. And hopefully we'll see you later this week or at another session.